Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas.
And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Here we are in 2020. Who would have believed we'd have lived this long? All that time we were expecting to die back in 2012, and well, let's face it, nothing happened. Tonight's show was requested by one of our listeners, Liz C. She said she wanted to hear something about Nostradamus, and so here he is. Nostradamus was born either the 14th or the 21st of December, depending on who you read, in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence of France. His birthplace is still existing today, and it's a big tourist attraction. Lots of folks travel there to see the place, one of the world's best sages, and he was baptized by the name of Michel. A lot of folks think the name Michel is female, kind of like Nikita. Michel is a boy's name, and it comes from the Hebrew name Michael. Michael, like Michel, means who is like God. I wonder about that song by the Beatles. Then there was a song called Nikita by Elton John, where in the video he's singing to a woman in a Russian uniform. When I hear the name Nikita, I think Nikita Khrushchev, as he was pounding on the desk with his shoe, claiming the Soviet Union was going to conquer the world. Well, Michel was one of at least 9 children. It's not that folks didn't care back then, it's just records were written on paper. It took too long to carve all of this into stone. Over the years, buildings fall apart. Things get lost. Names and places get destroyed. The library at the Vatican was boxed up and moved to Paris, where it was dumped on the floor of a warehouse. So the number of Michel's siblings is uncertain. It was a big family. Back then, if you wanted to have some descendants, you had to have lots of kids because most wouldn't last through the trials and tribulations of growing up. People didn't wash their hands after going to the bathroom. The water was contaminated. People killed each other for just about any reason. So Michel had lots of brothers and sisters. Michel's father had been Jewish, but he converted to Catholicism in 1459, and he took a Christian name of Pierre de Nostradamus, which can be also said Nostradamus or Notre Dame. This means Our Lady, after the saint day of the conversion. At some point in time, Michel began going by the last name of Nostradamus, kind of like saying the son of Notre Dame. Kind of like how Dracula's son began going by, Dracule's son began going by Dracula after his father. At the age of 14, Nostradamus entered the university at Avignon to study for his bachelor's degree. The word bachelor was used in the 12th century for a knight bachelor, a kind of knight who was too young or didn't have enough money to have his own vassals or minions. After little more than a year studying grammar and rhetoric and logic, which, considering the world around him, would have given him a leg up on the rest of the folks around town, Nostradamus left school due to an outbreak of the plague. It's a bit hard to pay attention in class when people are falling over dead all around you. After leaving Avignon, Nostradamus traveled the countryside for 8 years from 1521 on, researching herbal remedies. During this time, Nostradamus learned a lot about natural medicine. There are a lot of plants that, when used correctly, can heal people. Aspirin comes from the bark of the willow tree. Well, the plague ran its course, and those going to die did. Some folks said that Nostradamus found a cure for the plague. One of those plants he was messing about with may have helped people recover from the sickness running rampant due to a lack of hygiene and a lot of ignorance. Instead of cleaning the garbage, it was left laying around town. Rats carried the plague. Dead bodies were piled up in mass graves by people who then carried the plague back into town. Nobody bothered to bathe, and people wore the same clothes every day. A stinky, smelly place back then. In 1529, after some years as an apothecary, Nostradamus entered the University of Montpellier to study for his doctorate in medicine. Well, he was expelled shortly afterwards by the student procurator? Is that even a word? Well, it was discovered that he'd been working as an apothecary. Apothecaries were considered manual trade, right down at the working class level of society. People that worked with their hands were not allowed in certain places, like universities. If you worked with your hands, you couldn't possibly use your brain. I sometimes find the world is just too weird. It didn't help his position at all when the university heads found out that Nostradamus was also talking bad about doctors. It seems he didn't think a lot of good reason that most doctors were not nearly as smart as they thought they were. Some of the cures were far worse than the diseases they were designed for. Things like mercury and bloodletting. For example, did you know that just about every cure for high cholesterol are carcinogenic? Yeah, they lower your cholesterol and give you cancer at the same time. That sounds like a good idea, don't you think? Don't take my word for it. Look it up. Once back out on the street, Nostradamus went back to work looking for cures for diseases running rampant through Europe. He gained notoriety for coming up with a few useful medications, like the rose pill, that was said to prevent the plague. In 1531, Nostradamus was invented by Julius Caesar Scaliger, a leading Renaissance scholar who moved to Agen. That's a town, not a saying. There, he began practicing medicine and going by the title of doctor. A few people could read, and if you said you were a doctor and you acted like you knew things in medical field, you could be a doctor, as long as nobody ever dug too deep. In 1544, he moved to Ceylon, where he gained renown for his innovative medical treatments during the outbreak of the plague in ox and lion in 1546 and 47. Perhaps it was the loss of his family, or he found trying to cure diseases using what little supplies he had, Nostradamus began dabbling in prophecies. At the time, even with the Renaissance going on, people were still being killed for believing the wrong things. The Inquisition went from the 12th century and ran late into the 1800s. Anything out of the ordinary, from grinding up some plants and using them to cure diseases to predicting the future, would send you to the dungeon where you'd be questioned, using all manner of painful activity, and then you were given the opportunity to confess to whichever crimes they wanted to accuse you of. In order to stay out of prison and away from the Inquisitionists, Nostradamus put his predictions into a kind of code. They were called quatrains, four-lined poems that rhymed and had secret meaning. The quatrains were grouped together in centuries or by the hundreds. Astrology was kind of on the edge of being good or evil depending on who was doing it and who was benefiting. If you were to predict the future of the local riffraff, you could wind up chained to a burning stake. If, on the other hand, you predicted the king's future, you could get away with that. Due to his connections to royalty, Nostradamus was never accused of anything that could have gotten him killed. His writings were examined a few times by clergy. They would read his works, but they could never come to any kind of a conclusion. It would seem that Nostradamus was smart enough to fool just about everyone who wanted him dead. And what was it Nostradamus did to predict the future? He sometimes used something called scrying. This is not too complicated, but it did take some effort. You sit in a dark room at a good sturdy table. You don't want it to shake, which would cause ripples. In the middle of the table, you place a bowl filled with water. You gaze across the water at what is being reflected on the surface. The tricky part is seeing what is just beyond the reflection. You have to clear your mind and let the images come to you. Some folks say you can only do this on a full moon. Others say it's only workable at night. I think it will work in just about any conditions. It's not the water or the mirror or the room you use. It's the viewer. The person doing the viewing is what is necessary. I've talked to people who live in haunted houses. People have seen ghosts and spirits in the building on many occasions. Yet, the people living there will say they never see anything. I believe seeing spirits and ghosts is kind of like listening to a radio. You turn into a station, you hear classic rock. You turn the knob or you push a button, the channel changes to country. You only hear the station you're tuned to. You don't hear classic rock on a talk radio station. People are all tuned to whatever they want to hear. I can say something to a group of people and several will hear things I never said. If a person is in a house where ghosts hang out, but they are tuned to the idea that only crazy people see ghosts, that person will never see anything out of the ordinary. Even if they do, they'll quickly convince themselves they didn't see what they just saw. Once again, I've seen this happen. A person standing right next to me. We both see an unexplainable image. After a few minutes, the person has talked themselves into not having seen anything. That's their loss. You can also use scrying to look for spirits. Hold a mirror in front of you, but at an angle. Look for images that are in the glass but not visible without it. The major trouble with scrying for spirits is whatever you see is standing behind or beside you. It's just a bit creepy. And Nostradamus had friends in high places, so even when the church was looking into his unusual dealings, they never hauled him before the inquisitors to ask for his paranormal visions. When the king is inviting you to tell his future, it's not a good idea to make waves. Nostradamus produced 942 quatrains containing predictions for the future. He wrote about things to come up until the year 3797. This would negate all those folks who say Nostradamus had predicted the end of the earth on so many different years. What were some of his writings? Well, here are a few I found interesting. We have to take other people's word for what Nostradamus said. To begin with, I don't speak or read French. Nostradamus wrote back in the 1500s. The language has changed a lot over the years. Words took on different meaning. New words came into being while others stopped being used. This, combined with his explainable paranoia, Nostradamus wrote in a form of code. I don't have the time to learn French and then spend years deciphering his writings, but there are folks out there that do. So here is what other folks say he said. Nostradamus has received credit for predicting how King Henry II of France would die. He said, "The young lion will overcome the old one on the field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eye through a golden cage. 2 wounds made 1. Then he dies a cruel death." And just reading this, it's impossible to say this particular person or particular event was going to happen at a particular time. Only once the death was done was it clear, well, kind of clear, what Nostradamus was seeing. At the time of his death, Henry II was 40 years old, and Montgomery was facing an opponent 6 years his junior. Also, both participants had lions on their shields, which accounted for the opening line of the quatrain, "The young lion will overcome the old one." The single battle on the field of combat in the second line refers to a jousting match which ultimately caused the injury. As the participants pass each other, Montgomery's lance hit Henry's shield and the wooden pole shattered. A piece of the lance flew up and passed through the visor, the golden cage. The only part of the visor that was open was the eye slits, and the sliver poked right through Henry's eyeball. Ouch. This in itself would be very painful. I was working the brush out of town in the middle of the night. I walked through a thick brushy area and I got a twig right in the eye. Me being me, I didn't bother to say anything to my supervisor. I thought it was no big thing and that little bit of a pain would go away soon. The next day I was at the doctor's office ready to pay any amount to get the pain in my eye to go away. It hurt so bad I thought my eye was going to explode. The doctor squeezed some goo out of a tube, lidocaine, which is a derivative of cocaine, and the pain was gone. I think I paid about $100 or so, which included the tube of eye goo. Had to stay home for a few days because I couldn't see out of one eye. Well, lidocaine hadn't been invented back in 1559. King Henry II had only wine to kill the pain, so he was given as much as he could handle. Still, the pain was there day and night until the infection set in. Penicillin wouldn't be invented until 1928. The doctors treating the king didn't even bother to wash their hands before poking the injured eyeball. As the infection got worse, the eye would swell, which would cause more pain. Well, Henry also had enormous concussion, and the brain had also gotten poked by the splinter, which had stuck through the eye socket. His brain got infected as well, which then caused it to swell. I'm talking about a headache. Let's just say sometimes it's not good to be the king, as Mel Brooks said in The History of the World. Henry died 11 days later after suffering paralysis, convulsions, respiratory problems. 2 wounds made 1. Then he dies a cruel death. It sounds as if Nostradamus got this one right. After the accuracy of his prediction, Nostradamus was invited to read the astrological charts of the royal children by Henry's widow, Catherine de Medici, and he was thrust into the public eye, for which he built a platform to become the all-seeing prophet he's still regarded to as today. One of Nostradamus's prophecies pertained to a fire that will demand the blood of London. This prediction actually came true September 5th, 1666. Yes, that's right, 666. When the Great Fire of London swept through vital parts of the English city and laid waste to many great structures. The major conflagration ruined the homes of a huge percentage of the city's residents, with an estimated 70,000 city inhabitants affected by the fire, which was out of a total of 80,000. The blood of the just will be lacking in London, burnt up in the fire of 66. The ancient lady will topple from her high place. Many of the same sect will be killed. The damaged infrastructure also included St. Paul's Cathedral and 87 parish churches, 13,200 residential edifices, and countless city buildings. Though the threat of destruction was there, the suburban slums, the Palace of Whitehall, and the Westminster aristocracy was left untouched. More than 200 years before the French Revolution, Nostradamus prophesied major changes would take place in the home of his fellow countrymen. The unrest in the 18th century France came about due to financial problems that provoked the peasants into a period of social upheaval, and as Nostradamus predicted, the outcry resulted in a bloodbath. Written down in Century 1, Quatrain 14, Nostradamus said, "For the enslaved populace, songs, chants, and demands, while princes and lords are held captive in prisons. These will in the future be headless idiots, be received as divine prayers." For centuries, France had been ruled by an absolute monarchy, and due to the involvement in the 7-Year War as well as France's role in the American Revolution, the country was not only broke, but deep in debt. Since the ruling class never worried about those at the bottom of the food chain, the king and his fellow royals simply raised taxes on everything and continued as if the world were their plaything. By the end of 1789, food prices had increased so dramatically, the majority of the peasant population couldn't afford a piece of bread. This was when, in answer to the people of France starving due to not being able to buy bread, Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." When France's financial minister published a report of the country's incredible debt, albeit incorrectly, he was promptly fired by King Louis XVI. Well, A radical left-wing political group took this as an act against the assembly, and they called for open rebellion. Crowds gathered outside the gates of Versailles to protest, and brutal riots had broken out in the streets of Paris. The people wanted to address the old ideas about the tradition of monarchy and overthrow the hierarchy of aristocracy. The people of France had seen what was going on in America, and they wanted some for themselves. The people demanded democracy, equality, and enlightenment. In other words, they wanted to know what was going on. New laws, such as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizens, were drafted, but strongly opposed by the elitist monarchy. After 3 years of unrest, the aristocracy collapsed and its members were beheaded. And now for my rant. The United States of America is not now and never has been a democracy. I hear people all the time lauding the benefits of a democracy that is actually a very bad thing. As Benjamin Franklin said, a democracy is 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting on what's for dinner. The United States of America is a republic. Like the Pledge of Allegiance says, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A democracy is 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting on what's for dinner. A republic is 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting on what's for dinner, but the sheep has a shotgun. That's what Ben said. A democracy is crowd rule. If 51% of the crowd want to kill you, they can vote for your death. This is why the Second Amendment is so important, but that's another show. Century 1, Quatrain 14. From the enslaved populace, song, chants, and demands, while princes and lords are held captive in prisons, these will in the future, by headless idiots, be received as divine prayers. From the brief account of historical events in France, we can determine that the enslaved populace Nostradamus referred to are the peasants, and the princes and lords are the aristocracy the people sought to overthrow. In 1792, King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were publicly executed by the guillotine, thus considered by Nostradamus as being headless idiots. The French prophet not only predicted the downfall of the monarchy, but also that the revolution would cause much bloodshed. Century 2, Quatrain 57. Before the war comes, the great wall will fall. The king will be executed. His death coming too soon will be lamented. The guards will swim in blood. Near the river Seine, the soil will be bloodied. On July 14th, 1789, the mobs that was running amok in the streets of Paris stormed the Bastille fortress. This was a prison that was perceived to be the symbol of royal power. It also contained a large cache of weapons and ammunition that the insurgents wanted to get their hands on so they could battle the authorities. Here we see the importance of the Second Amendment once again. If only the government has weapons, they don't have to listen to you. The 2 wolves from Ben's story. After several hours of fighting with the guards in a bloody battle, the insurgents captured the fortress and decapitated the governor. His head was placed on a spike and paraded around the city. Oh, what times we miss from not being around back then. Nostradamus predicted the fall of the empire would begin with the capturing of the Bastille, which stands on the banks of the river Seine. But what of the second part? His death comes too soon will be lamented. In 1792, France was confirmed as a republic, yet within a decade, another empire was in place, and despite their burdening debts, the country was again at war, this time with Britain in the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte was in the French army at the beginning of the French Revolution. When he saw the uprising was going to win, he quit the government position and he joined the revolt. Having a lot of military experience, Napoleon was in the right place at the right time to seize power once the revolution had run its course. An emperor will be born near Italy. Well, Napoleon was born in Corsica off the Italian coast. Century 1, Quatrain 60 says, "He will cost his empire very dearly. He is less a prince than a butcher. From simple soldier he will attain the empire. Italy, Spain, and English tremble. He will be greatly attentive to foreign women." Napoleon had a lot of lovers. He was especially fond of Josephine, who was from the Caribbean, Marie Waloska, who was a Polish princess, and his second empress, Marie Louise, who was from Australia. For 14 years, he will hold his tyranny. Napoleon ruled as First Consul, then later as Emperor of France from 1800 to 1814. He fell from power as a result of his disastrous Russian campaign in 1812, of which the prophet said, "The kingdom rushes to great misfortune. A mass of men approach from Russia. The destroyer will ruin the old city. He will see his Roman Empire quite desolated. He would not know how to extinguish the great flame." Moscow was set on fire. Napoleon's army was forced to desert the charred ruins on the outset of the Russian winter. Ready to fight, he will desert. The chief adversary will be victorious. The rear guard will make a defense. Those who falter dying in the white country. The Russian army followed the retreating French army and killed most of the men left to cover the escape. Napoleon deserted the remains of his retreating army, which was destined to die almost to a man in the snows of Russia. Nostradamus wrote in the 3rd month, "The boar and the leopard meet on the battlefield." June 1815, 3 months after his escape from exile, Napoleon, who Nostradamus called the boar, fought the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo. Napoleon called Wellington the leopard of England. The fatigued leopard looks up to heaven and sees an eagle flying in the sun. They will appear to the victor. Neither bugle nor cries will stop the French soldiers. In time, liberty and peace is achieved through death. At Waterloo, Wellington's battered army had withstood every French attack. At sunset, Napoleon hurled his own imperial guard in one final charge. As the French attack mounted the ridge, the Duke and his men could see the brass eagles atop the standards of Napoleon's imperial guard, swinging against the setting sun. Moments later, an English volley shattered the charge, and the French were routed. The great empire will be exchanged for a little petty place, to which he will come to lay down his scepter. Napoleon was exiled to a tiny island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821. With that, I am going to take a bit of a break and play a couple of commercials and drink some coffee, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Are you taking care of your skin? Or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956 723 3019. Don't let time get the best of you. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Coffee makes the world go round. And around here, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to.
And welcome back to the show. As I'd said earlier, Nostradamus wrote in a rhyming, poetic manner. This, combined with his disguising his words, leads us to have to interpret what his meanings might have been. Another prediction Nostradamus made was dealing with food poisoning. Food went bad back then and people got sick. Nobody knew about microscopic germs that could have a devastating effect on the human body. The unseen is revealed, hidden for such a long time. He will, Pasteur, as a demigod, be honored. This is when the moon completes her great cycle. But through slander by others, he will be dishonored. Nostradamus' prophecy seems to be pointing to Louis Pasteur, who lived from 1822 to 1895. Born in Dole, Pasteur was a French microbiologist and chemist who was able to offer the world a number of major scientific breakthroughs. Apart from his remarkable discoveries in the management and treatment of puerperal fever, he was also responsible for creating the first ever anthrax and rabies vaccine. Considered to be one of the three founding fathers of microbiology, Pasteur also became famous for coming up with pasteurization. This is a process that sterilizes milk and wine to prevent these substances from causing people to fall ill. But through slander by others, he will be dishonored. Louis Pasteur altered many long-standing medical concepts in Europe and was slandered by many of his jealous colleagues in the European medical community. The Second World War was one of the greatest Nostradamus predictions of all time. The two great ones clearly point to the two great powers that came face to face during the most devastating war, the Axis and the Allies. Throughout history, no war or battle can ever hope to rival World War II. It was during this time that distinctions between military and civilian resources were blurred in order to fuel the fight. One named Hister shall become a captain of Greater Germany. No law does this man observe, and bloody his rise and fall shall be. A lot of naysayers will tell you that Hister was obviously not a reference to Adolf. Skeptics are some of the most close-minded people on earth. I think their brains are actually in a vacuum. Alois Schicklgruber was born in 1837 to a single mom. Back then he was considered to be illegitimate. On his baptismal certificate, the name of the father was left blank, so Aloysius started out using his mother's last name, Schicklgruber. In 1842, Johann George Heidler married Aloysius' mother, Marianne. Alois was sent to live with Johann's brother. 1876, Alois was adopted into the family, and the baptismal registry was changed to show Johann George Heidler as Aloysius' father. The certificate was recorded in the country register as George Hitler. Alois then began using the name Hitler as his last name. Back then, spelling was left up to whoever had the pen. The name Hitler was also spelled Heidler, Hutler, and Hudler. It wasn't until 1906 that folks began to say that certain words were to be spelled in a certain way. This is when words like certain were spelled Certain. It sounds like it should be with an S instead of a C. Words were spelled certain ways, so people would know how to spell them from then on. Additionally, it is the only war that ever made use of nuclear weapons. To this day, it is also the most widespread battle, which mobilized millions and millions of military personnel. It is truly amazing that the deadliest human conflict was foretold centuries before it happened. Viewing the future from 500 years in the past, it is any wonder some of the names might just seem to be a bit off? Hitler, Hister, Hidler. Nostradamus didn't use a lot of dates in his prophetic writing, but 1999 is referenced. The year 1999, 7 months. From the sky shall come the great King of Terror. We have a very inaccurate calendar system. The year 2020 is supposed to be 2020 years from the date of Jesus' birth. The first problem is, nobody is sure when Jesus was born. Some will tell you he was born in the year 2. Others say he was born in -2. I found one place that said Jesus was actually born in 6 BC, or 6 years before the birth of Christ. So he was born 6 years before he was born. We just might be actually living in the year 2026. September 1752, the Julian calendar was replaced by the Gregorian calendar in Great Britain and the colonies. That would be us. The Julian calendar was 11 days behind the Gregorian calendar, so September 1st was followed by September 14th. The result was that from September 3rd to September 13th, 1752, absolutely nothing happened. The calendar switch also influenced the way George Washington's birthday is celebrated. He was born February 11th, 1731, but the anniversary of his birth is February 22nd because of the 11-day eliminated from the calendar. At the same time, New Year's Day was changed from March 25th to January 1st. Thus, according to the new calendar, Washington was born in 1732. This is not the first time the calendar was messed with. In 1545, the Pope removed 11 days from the year to try aligning the holy days with the calendar days. Also, due to the change of New Year's Day from January, the names of our months are all screwed up. The first Roman calendar, which came about in 535 BC, had 10 months and was only 304 days long. It began in March, named for Mars, the god of war. September means the 9th month, but we have it as the 11th. October means the 8th month, but now it's the 10th month. November is 9, but it's the 11th month. And December, which means 10, is the 12th month. Oh, I said September was 11th month, but it means 9, but it is. You know what I'm saying. September means 7, but it was the 9th month. Is 9/11. I should know that. Anyway, just disregard that thing about September. It is the 7th. It means the 7th month, but it is the 9th now. See, I don't edit this. I just make it happen and hope I get it right. Our dating system is a bit skewed, so we don't really know what year it is. Nostradamus didn't put dates on most of his predictions, but he did have 1999. And those of you that lived through it can testify that nothing happened. Every world leader has pronounced as being the Antichrist. And I do mean every. People know the name Antichrist and like to attach it to people they don't like. Our presidents are all called the Antichrist by whichever political party is not in power at the time. The Antichrist is consistently pitched as a villain. Nostradamus warned us that his war will last 27 years. But the French seer also explained that the destructive power of the Antichrist is needed to save humanity. In 1955, hypnotherapist Dolores Cannon claimed to have been in contact with Nostradamus through a hypnotic client. The message that came through was that the Antichrist would come from the Middle East and will have connections with Libya and Syria. Mavis very soon then will die, then will come. A horrible undoing of people and animals. At once one will see vengeance. 100 powers, thirst, famine, when the comet will pass. I read some of the translations about the Antichrist. If you stretch the story and change the meanings of everything, you can force the title on anyone. There was even a Secretary of the Navy named Mavis who was the 6th in line to become president if and when the 5 folks before him all fell dead. It is thought the man in question would have been a young man in 1986 and at a critical stage of his life, a time when he was making the next step up, perhaps. Nostradamus also said that Muammar Gaddafi, the former director of Libya, the former dictator of Libya, was helping to set the stage for the Antichrist to rise to power. At least, that's what folks doing the translating say he said. Gaddafi was killed by the National Transition Council in 2011 rebellion. This may have changed the course of history, according to Nostradamus, or we must assume the Antichrist is either a current senior figure of the NTC or he has close ties to them. This is all based on a channeled conversation between a hypnotist and one of her clients. The name Antichrist was never actually mentioned by Nostradamus. He did call someone Mavis, but the name was also translated by somebody who might have gotten things wrong. Mavis was supposed to be a comet and not a person, according to some. There have been a lot of comets passed by the Earth over the years. Remember Hale-Bopp? The Earth has managed to survive a lot of folks' predictions of its destruction. Yet, folks will latch on to some words they don't understand, interpreted by people they shouldn't listen to, and decide we're all going to die. Just like Arthur Dent kept saying. In another prediction, in the city of God there will be a great thunder. 2 brothers torn apart by chaos, while the fortress endures. The great leader will succumb. The 3rd big war will begin when the big city is burning. on the 11th day of the 9th month, that two metal birds will crash into two tall statues in the new city, and the world will end soon after. This Nostradamus prediction alludes to New York City, the World Trade Center, and the Twin Towers. The September 2011 assault on the Big Apple and the United States in general was a terrorist attack that led many to their deaths. It was not just the passengers of the hijacked planes who lost their lives, but the people who were in the buildings as well as those that went in to try to save them. I would never call New York City a city of God. There are lots of names that come to mind, but that's not one of them. The date September 11th has some historic importance, especially to the folks that attacked us. In 1683, the Turkish army laid siege to Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire. At the time, Pope Innocent III was in the city, but he managed to slip away before the Turks had surrounded the city. The Turks had an army of 150,000 men. Once they'd captured the outlying fortifications, the Turks began tunneling under the main walls. The idea wasn't to sneak in under the walls. It would take weeks to sneak enough men through the tunnels to do much more than get killed by the Austrians. The strategy was to pile explosives under the walls and blow them up. Then the army could pour in through what was left of the city's defenses. The Pope tried to get Louis XV to go to the aid of Vienna, but France wasn't interested in repelling the Turks just yet. Italy, Switzerland, and Germany were between the embattled city, and Louis said he would pass. When France refused to help out, the Pope sent word to Poland asking John Sobieski III, the King of Poland, to do something. To help persuade the king to help out, the Pope sent a trunk filled with gold. The King of Poland wanted to help out, but he knew if he took his army and rode to Vienna, the armies around Poland would take this as a good time to invade his country. So Sobieski managed to convince Germany, Saxony, and Bavaria to join him. And now, with an 80,000-man army, they rode to the rescue. They were outnumbered nearly 2-1. So the Polish king held his army on the backside of a ridge until the time was right. On the morning of September 11th, the combined armies from Poland, Germany, Bavaria, and Saxony came thundering out of the north. The Turkish army, which was made up of a lot of different countries, turned and ran. The way it worked back then is the Sultan would conquer another country or a tribe or an area. To keep the peace, the conquered would have to pay a tribute, gold and silver, and they had to supply the Sultan with soldiers for his army. The soldiers would come equipped with whichever uniform they wore at home, so the Sultan's army looked like a lot of folks all dressed differently. This led to a lot of confusion during many battles. This was what gave Vlad Tepes the advantage during the night attack on Mehmet the Conqueror in 1452. And once again, I'm getting off track. It was a one-sided battle. The Polish alliance met little resistance as they stormed into the Turkish camps. Back then, armies weren't actually paid. You served in the army and you were fed and given a uniform, and that was about it. When an army was vanquished, the spoils of war, which was anything you could grab, belonged to the winners. The Polish alliance grabbed everything left behind by the Turks. This amounted to everything the Turks had brought. Soldiers get hungry when they're busy killing their enemies. Huge sacks filled with what looked like beans were found all over the Turkish camp. Men would grab a handful and try eating them raw. Well, the beans tasted nasty. One of the officers in the Polish army told the soldiers they had to roast the beans first. Then they had to grind the beans into small bits and boil them. The black liquid was then drank. This concoction was later discovered to be coffee. The first coffee shop opened soon after. So, September 11th, 1683 may have led to September 11th, 2001. In the run-up to December 21st, 2012, I heard from a lot of Nostradamus experts who all claimed the seer had predicted the end was coming in 2012. I never put much stock in the end of the world coming. If I must quote, I will. Jesus said, "No one knows the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." Next time anyone, and I mean anyone, tells you the end of the world is coming, just ask yourself, would they know something that Jesus didn't? Nostradamus wrote about the world ending in 3797, so apparently we have a few years left to go. Nostradamus might have seen what really happened to John Kennedy. He said, "In the new lands, 3 brothers now shall come to power. 2 alone are born to rule, but all must die before their hour." A lot of folks never heard of Joe Kennedy, who died during World War II in an unexperimental bomber that blew up shortly after takeoff. Had he lived, he would have been the choice to run for president. With Joe Kennedy out of the way, John Kennedy was the next one up, so he ran for president and won. Bobby Kennedy never made it to the White House, but he was a senator and the attorney general, which is a form of ruling. The great man will be struck down in the day by a thunderbolt. An evil deed foretold by the bearer of a petition. According to the prediction, another falls at night time. Conflict in Rheims, London, and pestilence in Tuscany. An evil deed foretold by the bearer of a petition is thought to refer to the numerous death threats Kennedy received while in office. In the third line of the quatrain about the prediction that another falls at night, it could refer to Bobby Kennedy, who was assassinated in the early hours of June 5th, 1968. Conflict in Rheims, London, and pestilence in Tuscany. 1968, there were riots in London and Paris. Maybe there is something there. Rheims represented all of France, and 2 years earlier, Tuscany suffered floods which authorities feared would lead to pestilence. The ancient work will be accomplished, and from the roof evil ruin will fall on the great man. Dead, they will accuse an innocent of the deed. The guilty hidden in the misty copse. Had Kennedy been killed by conspirators, which I believe, who had planned his death for a long time, ancient work would have been accomplished. Authorities later found a spent .30-06 shell case on the roof across the street from the schoolbook depository. I believe Lee Harvey Oswald was framed, just like he said when he told the reporters He was a patsy. As for the guilty one hidden in the misty copse, how about the man on the grassy knoll? Nostradamus died from old age June 2nd, 1566, at the age of 63, which at that time was considered very old. His writings can be found in a lot of locations. The hard part is figuring out which bits to believe and which ones to discount. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. Let them know what they're missing. If you didn't much care for it, well, nobody wants to hear from you anyway. If you have any ideas that you'd like to hear on the show, send me an email at strangethings.arkanasa.com. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.